Welcome to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Pastor Steve Andrews. Let's read Leviticus chapter 20. Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, "Say to the people of Israel, any one of the people of Israel or of the strangers who sojourn in Israel, who gives any of his children to Molech, shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. I myself will set my face against that man and will cut him off from among his people, because he has given one of his children to Molech, to make my sanctuary unclean and to profane my holy name. And if the people of the land do at all close their eyes to that man, when he gives one of his children to Molech, and do not put him to death, then I will set my face against that man and against his clan, and will cut them off from among their people, him and all who follow him in whoring after Molech. If a person turns to mediums and necromancers, whoring after them, I will set my face against that person, and will cut him off from among his people. Consecrate yourselves, therefore, and be holy, for I am Yahweh your God. Keep my statutes, and do them. I am Yahweh who sanctifies you. For anyone who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. He has cursed his father or his mother, his blood is upon him. If a man commits adultery with the wife of his neighbor, both the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. If a man lies with his father's wife, he has uncovered his father's nakedness. Both of them shall surely be put to death, their blood is upon them. If a man lies with his daughter-in-law, both of them shall surely be put to death, they have committed perversion, their blood is upon them. If a man lies with a male as with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination, they shall surely be put to death, their blood is upon them. If a man takes a woman and her mother also, it is depravity. He and they shall be burned with fire, that there may be no depravity among you. If a man lies with an animal, he shall surely be put to death, and you shall kill the animal. If a woman approaches any animal and lies with it, you shall kill the woman and the animal. They shall surely be put to death, their blood is upon them. If a man takes his sister, a daughter of his father, or a daughter of his mother, and sees her nakedness, and she sees his nakedness, it is a disgrace, and they shall be cut off in the sight of the children of their people. He has uncovered his sister's nakedness, and he shall bear his iniquity. If a man lies with a woman during her menstrual period and uncovers her nakedness, he has made naked her fountain, and she has uncovered the fountain of her blood. Both of them shall be cut off from among their people. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister or of your father's sister, for that is to make naked one's relative. They shall bear their iniquity. If a man lies with his uncle's wife, he has uncovered his uncle's nakedness. They shall bear their sin, they shall die childless. If a man takes his brother's wife, it is impurity. He has uncovered his brother's nakedness, they shall be childless. You shall therefore keep all my statutes and all my rules, and do them, that the land where I am bringing you to live may not vomit you out. And you shall not walk in the customs of the nation that I am driving out before you, for they did all these things, and therefore I detested them. But I have said to you, you shall inherit their land, and I will give it to you to possess, a land flowing with milk and honey. I am Yahweh your God, who has separated you from the peoples. You shall therefore separate the clean beast from the unclean, and the unclean bird from the clean. You shall not make yourselves detestable by beast or by bird or by anything with which the ground crawls, which I have set apart for you to hold unclean. You shall be holy to me, for I, Yahweh, am holy, and have separated you from the peoples, that you should be mine. A man or a woman who is a medium or a necromancer shall surely be put to death. They shall be stoned with stones. Their blood shall be upon them. This is the word of the Lord. Our text today is largely a repeat of the last two chapters, but it builds on that by listing off the punishment for the sins that we have recently read. So, child sacrifice to Molech, the false god, was mentioned in chapter 18, and here we see it again being brought before us, but now we are told the penalty for it is death. This is stronger than being cut off, typically speaking. Being cut off is being kicked out of the community. You're no longer able to live in Israel, which also means you're cut off from the house of Yahweh. You're cut off from the sacrifices. You're cut off from salvation. That's a strong punishment. But the death penalty is stronger yet. Arguably. I say arguably because there are some who look at a text like the start of chapter 20 here and suggest that when God says cut off, he actually means kill. And you see both of those descriptors of the one who sacrifices their children to Molech, right? Verse 2, shall surely be put to death. And then verse 3, I myself will cut him off. So there is some kind of a connection, an overlap here, and that would be then that God has cut him off. So the people have stoned him to death, and God has cut him off from salvation. So that's the strongest punishment possible, right? If you're offering your children to a false god, you're not God's person any longer. Now, it mentions here that this would make his sanctuary unclean. Thus, the assumption is that they are offering the children in the house of God. The child sacrifice is done on the altar for burnt offerings. And unfortunately, historically for Israel, this does happen. There are times in their future periods where this occurs. His name is profaned in the temple itself. Now, if the people refuse to punish him, first, verse 2, they stone him, the people do. God is inviting his people to participate in his judgment. This might connect for us to the future into 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 3, where Paul says, and this is one that puzzles people a lot, Paul says, do you not know that we are to judge angels? The Lord, when he created Adam and Eve, created them to partake of, to participate in his dominion, his rule over his creation. Now, part of his rule over his creation, because of sin, is also judgment. And so God is inviting his holy people to participate with him in that dominion, in that care for creation, and judgment is part of it. Judging the person who commends their children to Molech, that is preventing other people in the future from sacrificing their children to Molech as well, right? And that's a part of this. God is inviting them to participate, and it also helps them to learn the danger of this thing. Don't do this. It highlights the law before them. Whereas if God just, made that person disappear, there's not a reinforcement of the reason for the law. Unlike if he invites his people to participate. So if they refuse to participate, is what verse 4 says, they close their eyes, they ignore the man's sin, and they don't put him to death as God has said, then not only is God going to punish that man, he's going to punish his clan. So it's the clan, it's the people closest to him, the extended family around him. They're the ones supposed to do this. And if they won't, God cuts them off completely. And this does happen in the history of Israel. We don't have as many examples to readily bring up. I mean, the entire tribe of Benjamin at one point gets cut off, but that's not the same situation here. That's Judges 20 where you can see that one. Verse 6 then takes us into necromancy, mediums again, which we talked about. That was just yesterday, I believe, in chapter 19. Yep, verse 31. Those God will also cut off from among his people. Not the mediums and necromancers, they're mentioned in verse 27. They're put to death for their sin. But the person who consults them is not killed, but cut off. So the lesser punishment. Consecrate yourselves. You are set apart. That's what that word means. Make yourself holy. Sanctify yourself. Make yourself set apart. Be holy. Be God's people. For I am Yahweh your God. Yahweh sanctifies you. Yahweh makes you holy. So God is going to make you holy. You're called to make yourself holy. But it is the Lord ultimately that can do this thing. Verse 9, for anyone who curses father or mother shall be put to death. So the death penalty is invoked on the one who does not honor mother and father. That's actually seen in the Ten Commandments themselves, right? When you look at Exodus chapter 20, honor your father and your mother that you may live long in the land that Yahweh your God is giving you. The reason for the death penalty connected to the cursing of father or mother, or striking them, I think as it's said elsewhere, if you don't honor your parents, what's missing? Your parents, and specifically your father, are the ones that God has entrusted to teach you the faith. So if you're going to strike your parents, or if you're willing to curse your father, you're not going to learn about Yahweh from them. And so you are going to grow up godless. You're going to be a threat to the rest of God's people, to lead them astray from him. And so the Lord is going to severely punish that as you seek to destroy others. We get back then in the next section, the sexual immorality. So this goes back to chapter 18. The punishment for sexual immorality, the punishment for sex outside of marriage is in some cases death, and in other cases being cut off. And there's a third option as well of childlessness. We'll see that at the end of the text. So the first few that lead to death, which ones are death? So sleeping with your neighbor's wife, so adultery, period. Like that's the first one. And then sleeping with specific examples of neighbors' wives here are your mother, right? Your daughter-in-law, so the one who marries your son. Homosexuality. If you were to sleep with a woman and her mother, we saw that in the chapter 18 as well. That's another example here. Bestiality, sleeping with an animal. Those all result in death. And the words, their blood is upon them. They are at fault, right? They have committed their own sin in that way. Now, verse 17, the penalty is lesser from that point forward. If you sleep with your sister, or let's see, who else? Verse 18 shifts to actually the woman's menstrual period time. Then the penalty for these is to be cut off from your people. Verse 19, sleeping with your aunt, is combined with verse 20, your uncle's wife, and this one leads to barrenness, as does sleeping with the wife of your brother. So aunt or your brother's wife leads to barrenness. Barrenness then is a punishment from God. Barrenness is a curse from God upon people. I don't want to deal with barrenness a whole lot in today's episode, as there are better places in Scripture to talk about it. But the people of the Old Testament era, they did view barrenness as a curse. Children are the fruit of the womb. They're a reward from God. They are a gift. They are a blessing. And so if you don't have them, if God is not blessing you, they viewed it as God must be cursing you. And here in particular, yes, he is. In these punishments of sexual immorality, the Lord is the one who opens the womb and closes the womb. Bear that in mind. It is odd that we live in a world today that actually seeks after barrenness, goes out of the way to sterilize themselves. Women, young women, even teenage women, intentionally receiving treatment to sterilize themselves. That is how utterly we reject God's gift of children in this era. For those who are barren, pray to the Lord. Trust in Him. Now, as we move forward then, the close of the text is going to be a summary. We've moved away from the punishments now. If you do God's commandments, then the land will not vomit you out, right? Again, live long in the land that God has promised. They are not to walk in the customs of the nation that he's driving out. That would be the Canaanites, the various tribes, whether it's the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Girgashites, Jebusites, etc. There were several living in that region. God's driving them out because they did these things, and he detests these things. So he judged these people. He destroyed these people. So if God's people do the same thing, he will detest and drive them out as well. But, verse 24, I have said to you, you shall inherit their land. I will give it to you to possess, a land flowing with milk and honey. Milk is a product that they cannot keep. They don't have refrigerators like we do today. So milk was rare, as was honey in a sense. Honey is their dessert. I mean, they don't have cake and things lying around. They have honey for that sweet treat. So these are great things that God is promising to them in this land. It will be rich and bountiful for them. Now, we might stop and talk about what land God has promised to us. Ask your children, see if they know what land God has promised to them. And if they don't, John chapter 14, verses 2 and 3, Revelation chapter 21 and 22. Those are the texts to go and read. The new heaven, the new earth. Jesus saying he's preparing a place for us and going to take us to be with him there. We have a promised land, and it is paradise. Not heaven. There's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. A paradise, much like it was when God first created, that he's preparing for us, that we get to live there and we get to have dominion over as we reign with Christ forevermore. I am Yahweh your God who separated you from the peoples, so the other nations, they are set apart. Now you might ask your children this question too. Why are they set apart? Why has God set this people apart? What makes them separate? Why is that important that they're set apart? What I'm getting at there is that they're an example. They're a beacon. They're a light to the nations, as we know Jesus says of us as Christians today. By living out God's will among the other nations will continue to live in their sin and in their chaos and in the fallenness of their pagan gods, and they will see God bless his people. And they will desire that for themselves, and they will have the opportunity to hear of God from Israel, should Israel do what God has given them to do. But because they refuse to, later on, the Lord will wipe them off as well. He will cut them off, and he will remove them from the land. But with a remnant, he preserves in order that he can continue his promise to send us Christ the Savior, who delivers us all. So, part of the setting apart, they set apart the animals. Keep the clean animals from the unclean ones. Don't even risk it. You're set apart. That last reminder, it kind of feels odd in the place that it is for the mediums and necromancers of verse 27. It feels like it should be earlier in the list, maybe even around where verse 10 is. It should be stuck up there. This is part of being set apart, though. The other nations have these things too. So here's a reminder. Just because your neighbors do it doesn't mean you should do it. That's going to be a problem for Israel when they demand a king so they can be just like their neighbor nations. They don't want to be set apart. So the Lord has set you apart in the waters of your baptism. He has redeemed you. He has called you by name. You are his. And we are called to live that out in order that our neighbor may hear the good news of Jesus too and join us one day in paradise.